ammunition. They also supported a level of prosperity that was unusual in wartime. The surrender of Fort Fisher on January 15th of 1865 signaled the end of an era. A few weeks later, Union forces occupied the city. 2 brigades of U.S. colored troops, 3,149 men to be exact, participated in this campaign and suffered heavy casualties. African American soldiers were later interred in the northwest corner of the Federal Cemetery on Market Street. The Civil War and its aftermath had 2 significant repercussions for the city's residents. It devastated their economy and forever altered relations between the 2 races. But having gained not only their freedom, but the vote and access to education, African Americans in Reconstruction era Wilmington pursued a wide array of advancements in the political, economic, and social spheres. These advances were linked to the city's renewed prosperity. In the first 2 decades after the Civil War, Wilmington expanded its role as a regional railroad center and began to attract new businesses. Buoyed by their economic success, members of the city's African American community also acquired a foothold in the city's county and state politics. In 1897, Wilmington had 125 African American entrepreneurs owning and operating businesses and had become a national symbol of black success. African Americans who were in the majority owned 10 of the city's 11 dining establishments and 20 of its 22 barbershops. Black people worked for themselves as architects, lawyers, doctors, jewelers, watchmakers, and tailors. Black men occupied 3 of the 10 alderman seats after the Fusionist Party claimed power, and the literacy rate among black males in the city was actually higher than the whites during that time. Because most of the city's freedmen favored the Republican Party, leading Democrats grew alarmed. They, like many other Southerners, perceived the growing political power of African Americans as not only an obstacle to economic development, but a challenge to their traditional way of life. Beginning in the 1890s, white Wilmingtonians, like white Americans elsewhere, took aggressive measures to halt this dual threat. The result was Wilmington's and the nation's infamous government overthrow of 1898. On the morning of November 10th, a group of white men, mostly armed, burned the offices of the Daily Record, a black newspaper across town, because it condemned practices like lynching alleged black rapists and argued that some white women willingly pursued relationships with black men. It was the only daily black newspaper printed in North Carolina at that time. While the white mob was returning to their homes in Brooklyn at the intersection of North 4th and Harnett Street, they came upon a group of black men, mostly unarmed, who gathered on the southwest corner to discuss the new and violent turns of events. The whites ordered the blacks to disperse. The blacks refused, and after a heated exchange of words, the first shots of the day were fired. Over the next few hours, Wilmington experienced one of the worst politically and racially motivated episodes in American history. Homes and churches were damaged, businesses were destroyed, and lives were forever altered. When the smoke cleared, 3 white men had been wounded, and a number between 700 to 300 blacks were dead. Most of the city's violence had taken place in Brooklyn, and an unknown number of the neighborhood's black residents sought refuge in nearby swamps and cemeteries. Others hid in their homes, and some fled Wilmington altogether. At City Hall, the armed mob of whites, led by some of Wilmington's most prominent citizens, removed from office the city's duly elected biracial government in what historians consider the only successful coup d'etat in the history of the United States. This monument serves as a symbol of Wilmington's commitment to an inclusive society, a tribute to all who over the years have struggled to reverse the tragic consequences of the 1898 racial violence, and a memorial to those African Americans killed in that violence. Before November 10th, 1898, Wilmington's African American population was at 60%. After 1898, Wilmington's African American population dropped to 39%, and today it is as low as 18%. This event marked the onset of the Jim Crow era in North Carolina. The 20th century brought many changes to Wilmington. By 1910, blacks had lost their numerical majority and were once again subject to segregation by statutes. Despite a brief reprieve during World War I, Wilmington's economy was declining rapidly. Many African Americans left during the 1920s and 30s to seek better paying jobs in northern cities and the industrial Piedmont. Those who stayed turned inward and focused their attention on personal, family, and community interests. As a result of World War II, Wilmington and the rest of the South experienced a boost of economic activity that lasted throughout the 1950s and 1960s. From 1936 until 1966, the Negro Traveler's Green Book provided valuable lodging resource information for middle-class tourists and the country's popular entertainers. James Jimmy Lofton owns one of those Jim Crow segregation era special properties. The Payne's Tourist Home of 1956 ad describes the structure as steam heated and a provider of comfort and convenience, quote unquote, where particular people stop. Who are some of these particular people? The Duke Ellington Band, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, Lionel Hampton, and many other musicians were some of their special guests. Over the course of the Green Book's 30 years in publication, Wilmington had 50 locations listed, and that was the second most in the state behind Charlotte's 53. Wilmington's 50 locations included 16 beauty parlors, 14 places to dine, 7 taxi businesses, 3 barbershops, 3 drugstores, among many other businesses. African Americans prospered along with the rest of their neighbors, but not equally. Their frustration helped pave the way for the Civil Rights Movement. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, Wilmington's black citizens were once again enfranchised. However, discrimination and racism persisted. In the early 1970s, racial tensions erupted in the school desegregation riots and the trial of the Wilmington 10, where 10 people were imprisoned on the charge of firebombing a local grocery store known as Mike's. Both the riots and the trial received national coverage from the media. They were pardoned in 2012 by North Carolina Governor Beverly Perdue 50 years after the actual firebombing of Mike's grocery store. These events left an important legacy which Wilmington still endeavors to overcome. Today, Wilmington is experiencing yet another period of economic expansion, and it is clear that African Americans continue to have a crucial role in its development. By exploring their experiences and contributions in the past, it is hoped that you may come to appreciate their significance to the city's present and future.
Ballin' like Houston, ayy, feeling like Whitney.
Good morning again. Good morning. I know you're saying, why did he drive us through those apartments? We got you. Tour's over. I'm just messing. We drove you through those apartments because those were actually one of the first low-income housing, what we call housing developments. Some people like to say, and I will tell you and be very transparent, the projects. And it was made by this young man named Robert Taylor. He designed these particular homes, not the ones that we're looking at because it didn't look like this. Robert Taylor was the first African, from Wilmington, North Carolina, the first African American to go to MIT, and he majored in architecture. And he's the first African American in the United States to have a license in architectural sciences. While being at MIT in Massachusetts, what happens is they send for him. Someone sends for him and says, can you come down here and help us with our new university? Booker T. Washington sends him a letter and wants him to come to Tuskegee to help him build Tuskegee University. Excuse me. He does that, and if you ever go to MIT, or if you go to MIT to major in architecture, you'll be in the Robert Taylor, the Robert Taylor School of Architecture. He then leaves there, comes back, and builds these homes. He has a son. Robert L. Taylor Jr. And Robert L. Taylor Jr. does the same thing, but he does it in Chicago. So if you've ever been to Chicago, there's something called the Robert Taylor Homes, one of the worse than Cabrini Green projects. Y'all ever seen Good Times? Mm-hmm. It was like that. They have since torn that down, but they were named after his son, Robert L. Taylor. And his father was a master carpenter. And we're going to put the Taylors on the proverbial shelf, and we're going to take them back off, okay? But this is the North Side, and sometimes the North Side is referred to as Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Really? So if you hear someone say Brooklyn, yeah. I know you were like, what, Brooklyn? So we refer to it as Brooklyn, and if you watch the numbers on the streets, they'll go Front Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, 4th Street, 5th Avenue.
Interesting.
So welcome to the North Side. This is actually where I grew up, and I actually grew up in these housing projects. So we're going to keep going. We're going to talk about folks, and we're going to stop and talk about the resurrection as well. So thank y'all again for getting on the tour. And like I said, if you have a question, feel free. Make sure you get some grits. Yes, sir.
Now is Taylor Homes older than Nesbitt Court?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It is?
It is, 100%. Yes. This is a story. I'm going to pass this around.
What's it called? Okay, we're going to get some chicken.
Also on the tour, as we go through Wilmington, certain parts of Wilmington on our tour, we will point out our black-owned businesses.
Oh, good.
Okay. Here's one right here to the left. If you see it, it's called Brunch Time. It's family owned by Corey and Fallon Scott. You can see the people waiting for their grits and shrimp and grits and biscuits and chicken and waffles.
It is good.
We discovered them this morning. Yes, buddy. Yep. Grandma biscuits.
The chicken and waffles is one of their premier items.
Right.
Because you can get it topped with peach cobbler
That's
or
the best
strawberry champagne.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That's not like much. You take my
Also
grandson
next
to
to
come
that
for
is the
his
Sugar Shack. So
graduation.
if we come back around 11 p.m. we can go to the Sugar Shack.
Oh, okay.
It's a late night dance hall.
Okay,
And
nice.
we play a food truck.
Keith go hang out with more Keith. We go to Sugar Shack.
What's really cool, I don't know, did anyone come in off of I-40?
Yes.
You came in? So if you came in off of I-40, you probably might have saw something that says Martin Luther King Parkway. I don't know if you might have seen that. But what's really cool is you come into the city, if you're coming from I-40, you're gonna come in off of MLK Parkway, and then you're gonna get on General Joseph McNeil Way. And we're gonna talk about General Joseph McNeil Way, and then you'll cross the Meadowlark Lemon Bridge.
Okay.
MCNEIL. So General Joseph McNeil is from Wilmington. Actually, he's from Mr. Freeman. He's from Seabreeze. And he is black. Now, General Major, let me get it right. Major General Joseph McNeil actually went to North Carolina A&T. He went to New York and came back, and he went to North Carolina A&T, and he didn't like what was going on, and him and three of his other friends sat at the Woolworths counter. That famous picture of the four black men. One of them is General Joseph McNeil, and this is General Joseph McNeil Way. Major General Joseph McNeil is from Seabreeze, and he is still living, so he can drive down the street named after him. It's very important. He is live today. Yes.
I have met them and I have a signed picture of
I
them.
think he has to be.
Tim.
Married
We was at his
Dickie
house.
McNeil.
Also to your right, if you look real quick to your right, you'll see the blue sign that says General Joseph McNeil.
And they are
Major
family.
General Joseph McNeil. Way.
They're married to the family.
That's right.
And
Now,
right
if I get
after
to meet the
that,
other two, that'd be great.
you got it from
Now that'll be
There
the
you go.
Like David Walker.
And right after that is the David Walker sign. Now, David Walker was an abolitionist. He was born free because his mother was free. And he wrote this book, The Appeal to the Colored Citizens, or Negro Citizens. At that time, of course, when he wrote that book, we weren't supposed to be reading. But he wrote this book, so much so where it appealed to Negro citizens as far as to get your education, to be independent and be farmers or own your own business. This book was so heated, and people did not like this book. They had to stitch the book inside of their jacket so people they wouldn't know they see the book, right? Also, 2 months after this book found its way to Virginia and got in the hands of Mr. Nat Turner.
Ooh, we know what he did.
I'll let y'all go from there.
But
It is
also,
simply, right.
but
Slavery
also
vote.
at the
They
time
threatened
of
to
this
kill him
book,
too.
it was illegal to have, and if you were caught with it, death was
Death
the
was
I was
punishment.
gonna say he was.
That's why they had to stitch it inside, jackets, clothing, and things.
I don't know if y'all can see that, but that's David Walker. If you see it,
His
right?
life was threatened too.
Right.
That's funny, that's one of my family names.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but they emanate from Georgia. Walker, Paulus Winters, Walker Hyde Walkers, Nash Reddick Smothers.
Amazing.
But see, the good thing about him is he was born free.
Yes.
And see, there was a legacy rule of if your parent was free, you were
are
able
free.
to be considered free as well. And he left here, because he got tired of seeing these people in shackled and chains and the treatment that they were receiving.
If you look right here to the left, this is what gentrification looks like.
Yes.
I just messed it. But that's what it does.
Yes.
Right to the left.
You ain't messing.
You'll see this actual sign that says Abraham Galloway. We love to talk about Abraham Galloway. We call him the James Bond of Wilmington, North Carolina, or North Carolina, period. He was a slave, and he tried several attempts to escape, and he finally escaped and joined the Union Army and became a spy. He came back and got almost 5,000 other black soldiers to join the Union Army and led a march to meet Abraham Lincoln. He also later became one of the first black senators of North Carolina during this time in 1800s. Of course, during that time, they made black folks come in the back door of the legislative house. But Abraham Galloway carried 2 pistols because he was in the army, and he was known to challenge someone to a duel, and he did actually challenge someone to a duel, and he killed them, and he died maybe 2 months later of mysterious causes. Now, where we're crossing right now, and that's, I don't know if y'all can see it, that's Abraham Galloway. Where we're crossing right now, this is the Meadowlark Lemon Bridge. Meadowlark is from Wilmington, North Carolina, the Clown Prince of basketball. And when they dedicated this bridge, the current Harlem Globetrotters came to dedicate this bridge. It was soon after he had passed away. But he is 100% from Wilmington, North Carolina, and he went to a school called Williston Senior High School. And we're gonna put them on the shelf, and we're gonna talk about Williston Senior High School as well. And we are still on the north side of Wilmington.
Edwina,
And I'm sorry I did not introduce Mr. Steve. This is Mr. Steve, our amazing driver.
Crusader for Education.
Hello, Mrs. Steve.
President of
We did not do
UNC.
that.
I'm trying to read the song.
Yeah, a lot of these will be online.
Now, what
You
we're
can
getting
look
ready
them
to
up.
do, we're getting ready to turn
I'll
onto
find
Red
that
Cross
website
Street.
again. I'll send it to
And
you.
as we turn onto Red Cross Street, it's going to get a little bumpy. Please don't blame Mr. Steve. He's an excellent driver. That's why he drives for us. But it is blame it on the stones.
I love this part of Wilmington.
Horrible stuff.
I just like this. I love them.
This, vintage and
Now,
just
coming up, if you look
nostalgic.
to your
Just
left, you'll see the Carolina Budget Store. It was on, I always say Carolina Furniture Store, old school. To your left,
So,
this particular
is it
store
affordable to
was
live over
actually
here?
one of the first stores to give credit to African American women who were working. And so they were able to get credit. There were 3 places: Belk's, Carolina Furniture Store, and also Weeds Jewelers, owned by the Zimmermans here. Also, Carolina Furniture was the first store to use African Americans in their commercials.
Oh, yeah.
Also to the left is McHale's Hair Design, and it's been there for about over 25 years. So if you're in town and you need to get back of that neck.
well, let me talk about the kitchen. Don't be talking about the kitchen.
I'm messing with y'all.
Or the edges.
Or the edges. Also to our left, we're going to be pulling up to this White House with the green awning on it. That is not the as known as house. That is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated house. And of course, it was founded in 1908 on the campus of Howard University here in Wilmington. It was founded in 1932 by 5 educators. They still doing the work of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and sometimes are in the house based off their committees. But when they have chapter meetings, they have to meet at UNCW because there's so many of them. Also to our left right here, St. Stephen AME Church. Any AMEs in here? No? Always
AME
meeting and
Zion.
eating. Oh, who's AME Zion? So that means y'all always meeting and eating on the hill.
That's
I just
right.
mess
Hey, if you feed them, they will come.
They will come. That's right.
What is the Eddie's?
African Methodist Episcopal.
African.
Yes. So to our left, when the insurrection started, they actually, by the mob, when they got here to the north side, they entered this building thinking that there was artillery in this building in the basement. But in the basement was where you see the very beginnings of Head Start. So there was a pool in the basement of this church, as well as a daycare. And when they got in, all they found was political pamphlets, but they did rush into this building. St. Stephen AME is home to the first female president of North Carolina State NAACP, Miss Deborah Maxwell. This is her church as well.
All right.
Probably should have gave y'all the book first because I'm a history teacher.
You are.
So everything you know, I taught. I taught North Carolina history.
Oh yeah, I love it. To the right is Charles Mortuary. On the Georgia is 1895. I think they're a little bit 30 years.
Yeah, you can look
late
at
because it actually is from 1865. This was actually one of the oldest black businesses in North Carolina. Now, with that being said, excuse me, during that time, they actually built some of their own coffins, and they had a horse-drawn buggy as far as getting caskets where they need to go. Fast forward to Jim Crow, they doubled as an ambulance service because we weren't picking each other up. The regular, I guess, ambulances weren't picking us up in our neighborhoods, so they doubled as an ambulance service. And this business is still going on today, Charles Mortuary. If you look behind Charles Mortuary, there's a white building. You might have heard them talking about the Payne's house. And in the Payne's house, this was the first Airbnb. We like to say this, but when teachers came to teach in Wilmington, when folks came to stay in Wilmington, they would have to stay there. There was no hotel that would allow us in, so they stayed at the Payne's Lofton House, and there was other places around the city where you would stay, and the actual dining room doubled as a dance hall. And it's on the Green Book, right here on the Green, in the Green Book.
In the group. All right.
Used to have them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I just ordered a bunch of them off.
And we're on Red Cross Street. I
Green Book.
didn't mention that. We're on Red Cross Street, so we're going to see some businesses. To your right, we're coming up on a red brick building, and there's some businesses in there. I think Trucks, Chicken and Fish. So y'all want some good spots?
Yes.
Check them out.
I love spots.
Also, there's a cosmetology space, hair design, and a barbershop. And this building used to double as the African American Library and NAACP headquarters.
I give to you now.
It stopped being the African American Library. It stopped being the African American Library in 1980.
Yeah, I got them.
So in 1980, it stopped being a library. Now we're on 7th Street. And we're going to talk about what's going on 7th Street, which is amazing. To your left is Central Baptist Church, one of the oldest churches, Baptist churches in Wilmington. Now, what happened during 1898, the pastor of this church stayed. So everything that's happening is crazy. There's people being murdered. There's people being taken out of their homes. And so to his congregation, he tells them to flee. And they flee into the swamp, into the cemetery, out into the woods. And he stays so he can send back word that it's okay to return to Wilmington. So he stays there. And he has one of probably the only accounts in his book. He actually is interviewed in this book.
Right.
And he tells the story. He's probably one of the only pastors that was brave enough to tell his story inside of this book. Now the bell is down on the ground because of Hurricane Hazel. That's why the bell was there on the ground. Because when it toppled over, they never put it back. And so the bell is there.
I'm gonna get the book.
No, I don't think
You gonna get?
Yeah, I'm gonna get the
one?
book.
Also, to our right, as we come up, you'll
They
see
got them for all
to your right.
years,
I'm sorry.
and all the
As you
stuff
come
is
up
not the
to
same,
the right,
you know,
you'll see
so
something that
they
looks like a
added, you know,
tombstone here.
businesses and stuff.
North
So I
7th
ordered
Street
the
was
ones, every
considered
one for each year,
Doctor's
like I
Lane, Black Doctor's Lane. And right here is the actual spot where they had the site of the community hospital. So when James Schober came to Wilmington as a doctor, when he got to Wilmington, he inherited 10,000 patients just like that because of the African Americans. So he was one of the only doctors. Later following him was Dr. Burnett. And Dr. Burnett got these folks together in the city to form the community hospital as well as the all-black nursing school and the black pharmacy. To your left, you see a big red building, red brick building. It's called the Burnett Eaton Museum. And if you ever want a tour, walking tour of Doctor's Lane, Sister Isla Speller, she'll give you a walking tour of Black Doctor's Lane. Also, there's a business on the side, Mustafa, a house of cuts. That's her son. Now, Dr. Eaton was also a doctor here in Wilmington, who actually helped with the integration of schools. And Dr. Eaton was the first African American to sit on the board at UNCW, and he was a doctor. He actually married Dr. Burnett's daughter, and that's another story for another time. Dr. Eaton also was sent a young lady from New York City because her parents said We want our child to have the rigor of Williston Senior High School. We want them to have the rigor of Williston Senior High School. We also want you to coach her. And they sent her to Wilmington to live with Dr. Eaton so he could coach her and send her to school. And that young lady was Althea Gibson. So Althea Gibson was sent from New York.
The tennis player?
Yes, she was sent from New York to live with Dr. Eaton. He sent her to school and he coached her tennis. And Dr. Eaton was an avid tennis player. She left there, went to FAMU, and then became the first black woman to win Wimbledon.
All right.
To our right, with the red porch, is the Delta Sigma Theta house. Now I said we were going to put the Taylors on a proverbial shelf and then pull them back off. We talked about Robert Taylor being the first African-American architect. Well, this was their house. This is where he grew up. Excuse me. And Henry Taylor was his father, and he built this house. He was a master carpenter, self-trained. And in this house, of course, Robert has a daughter as well. A sister named Effie. Now, in this house, if you take the top off this house and look down in it, it looks just like the Bellamy Mansion because Robert Taylor actually helped create the Bellamy Mansion on Market Street. When Effie goes to school, she goes to Howard University, pledges Delta, comes back, lives in the house of the Taylors, and then sells the house to Delta Sigma Theta for $50,000. And what happens is these women become the first black women to get a loan of that amount to purchase a home. The Deltas still meet in this house, just like the AKAs, they meet here, but all of them cannot fit in the building, so they have their meetings at the Community Boys and Girls Club, because there's so many of them.
Yep.
Yeah,
Jeffrey's
Historical Society.
Who's that?
The table.
This house right here
Yeah,
to the
Taylor's,
left,
that name is
This
associated with
greenhouse?
power too.
The one I
And
think
everything
of.
else
the
that
James
he does.
Drawburn Sampson house. Now the James, you probably heard them in the intro video talk about James Drawburn Sampson. He actually was a slave, and his father purchased him more slaves. I hope y'all understood that. He was a slave, and his father freed him and bought him more slaves.
That's right.
And he said, whatever do for you, or do for them what I've done for you.
So bond but freedom.
Yes. And so he bought them and taught them a trade. So if you were a Sampson during that time, that means you could work with your hands, and you were probably well off. You had a little bit of change in your pocket, for sure. And that happened at this house right here. Fast forward, Daniel Rowan to Black Doctor's Night. Dr. Daniel Rowan lives in this house and performs surgery in the West Wing upstairs in the last, where the last window is. Now we're getting ready to take our trek to the south side of Wilmington. If you have any questions, please ask.
I'm gonna get this one too.
So was this mainly the black side of Wilmington?
Actually, there's no black or white side.
I mean,
but
yeah.
So there's black folks that live on the north side.
Right.
And that's where I grew up.
Okay.
There's black folks that live on the south side too.
Okay, cool.
And then we have an east side with no west side. So because if we have a west side, we'd be
In the ocean. Got you.
Oh, we're getting ready to go to it right now. We're gonna pass. I'm glad. That's a great question. That was a great question. We're getting ready to go. We're getting ready to go to what divides us.
We need to look up that Jeffrey's house in Whiteville.
What
Yeah,
divides us?
that's the
That
only
might
thing
be-
listed in
that's a good
Whiteville.
book. Yeah.
The what? Jeffrey's house.
Jeffrey's house.
Look, go to the page in Whiteville.
Ma'am, to ask the question about the black side,
Yeah.
there was no exclusive neighborhoods. The reason being that black people had to stay in close proximity to their jobs.
Okay.
And what happens,
Look at all those Harris Wall
you know, like
signs.
this block might be white, this next block might be black, and what have you. That was one of the key reasons that Wilmington didn't have any exclusive
Okay.
neighborhoods.
So you have to think about that time in 1800s where you had your very first sheriff, black sheriff. You had a black deputy. You had a black police officer. You had 3 or 4 black fire department members. You had 3 or 4 black councilmen. that were well-to-do. This wasn't just, oh, we're going to put them on. This is happening way ahead of its time. We are way ahead of our time. Right now, we're going to turn on 10th Street. If you look to the left, this is called Portia Hines Park. We like to call it 10th Street Park. But there's something that they're working on the north side called the North Side Food Co-op. For years, even before me, there was never a grocery store on that side of town. And so now there will be 100% a food desert. And so they have received the funding to put together a grocery store on this side of town.
Max still exists. You know, it's funny how I've been almost all over Wilmington and I never really thought about the historic value in all this stuff. Yeah, because all these places, I have a daughter and a sister that stay in Wilmington, so I've been here frequently. So all these places I've been to at least once or twice in my travels here, but I never thought about the historical aspect behind them. Like when we came down to Brick Street, I've always loved that street, but I never really thought about the historic meaning behind the bricks in the road. I just traveled it, you know.
And they had names on the bricks.
Yeah, that were pavers.
Well, those are the pavers.
That's the pavers.
Right, so what we're getting ready to do, we're here to answer your question. Market Street divides us. So once we pass over Market Street, as soon as we get to this corner, we're on the south side. Now we're on the south side. All right? So also Market Street led all the way down to the river. And so at the end of Market Street was a market because that was named Market. And of course, you know what happened at the market. We trade for goods and services. And some of those services were us when we got to the end of Market Street. If you ever go to Charleston, they'll say, hey, welcome, we're going to the market. And the marketplace in Charleston was where they sold slaves as well. To our left, this is also in the Green Book. It used to be called the Green Store. And it was actually green, and you could go in, get something to eat, and stay the night upstairs.
Can I introduce something there?
Yes, sir, please, Mr. Freeman.
I got my wife from there.
You were in there hanging out? What's going on?
Do tell.
I came out of the Air Force.
Yes, sir.
She was working there.
Really?
Yes, and she saw me walking up. I have an Air Force uniform.
Yes, sir.
She saw me walking down the street, and the man said she took her apron off and said, I'm going, I'm out of here. And we got married, of course, and all that. Saw that uniform and had to have it.
I love it. I love to hear those stories. We love it. As we drive up closer, you might see it on your screen or here on the front screen, is what we call, Wilmingtonians call, the greatest school under the sun. It's Williston Senior High School. My mom was a class of 1964, and what she will say is we graduated doctors, lawyers, astronauts, and Indian chiefs. All came from Williston Senior High School. The big thing about Williston Senior High School is that it was the first accredited African-American high school in North Carolina. The big thing is those folks that came from it, Meadowlark Lemon, Althea Gibson went to Williston as well. Excuse me. Also, when we talk about class of 1964, we talk about Dr. Philip C. Clay. And remember, we were at Taylor Holmes, right? Dr. Philip C. Clay graduated from Williston. He grew up in Taylor Holmes, goes to Williston, graduates from Williston, goes to Princeton, leaves there, get a degree in engineering, and he becomes the chancellor of MIT later. And Dr. Philip C. Clay is still living.
All right.
Williston is still open. This is now Gregory Elementary, and to the right is Williston Junior High. The big thing is, you see this little drawbridge that goes across? That was the biggest thing for Williston students, to go across that marquee, or that little walkway, and get to Williston Senior High. 1968, April 4th, 1968, of course, you know, Dr. King was assassinated, but he was on his way here to Wilmington to give a speech at Williston Senior High School. He stayed one more day and was assassinated. Now, if you go to Memphis, they will tell you the same. If you take their tour, they'll say Dr. King was on his way to Wilmington and stayed one more day to work with the tragedy. So much so, Williston closes in 1968 due to integration. But the way they closed Williston, one day they woke up and they said, Williston is closed. Y'all going to the other schools in the outlying area. And that's what happened to Williston. They just shut down. They didn't integrate it. They just shut it down.
No warning.
Because of that, the class of 1969 and the class of 1970 never graduated until about a year ago.
Yeah.
And so 1969, 1970, they graduated last July, and they just gave them their diplomas. I think they're like 71, 72 years old. But if you ever seen a 71 or 72-year-old get their diploma, they're 18 again. Also to our left is On Time Restaurant. Now we passed brunch time, right? This is On Time, owned by the same family. It's just on the south side. It's not breakfast, but it's some good food. And we always like to highlight this business because a lot of times you'll see a black business go away and replaced by a white business. It was a black business owned by a young man named Booty. We call him Booty, New York restaurant. And he sold his business to another black business. He just didn't sell the building. And so Corey and Fallon run that. If you look on the side, you'll see a young man in gray and white in the glasses way down there on the left. That is Booty. When you see this, they have Althea Gibson on there and Dr. Eaton and some other folks on the wall. If you ever want to get it, you can get you a shrimp burger. And that is lettuce, tomatoes, with fried shrimp on a hamburger bun. Tell if you can't beat it. Also, their the Philly cheesesteak egg rolls.
Okay.
The OMG fish sandwich too.
Oh my goodness.
You go in there and get you something. So if you're here, definitely stop by and get you something. We're on Castle Street.
What's it before?
Now we were on 4th Street earlier, which was the epicenter or epicenter of African American business on the north side. Castle Street was the epicenter of business, black business on the south side. Since 1898, there's only been 2 African American county commissioners. One was John Barfield, and then now his son Jonathan is a county commissioner. It's only been 2, and they own this building right here, Quality Cuts, which is a barbershop.
So are there any by the block projects going on down here?
It's not called By the Block, but it's something similar to
Something
that.
similar to
Yes.
it? Okay.
Now we were on 7th Street on the north side of Wilmington. This is 7th Street, South 7th Street. South 7th Street is probably one of the most important places to us when we talk about 1898 and also when we talk about the Civil Rights Movement. Just like we talk about St. Stephen was a place in a hub of culture, so is St. Luke. This is St. Luke AME Zion Church. Now St. Luke, shouts out to Pastor Armand, because they call it the new St. Luke. But the building that you're looking at is the actual building from the 1800s. Maybe with a new roof.
Well, look at the quality of that construction.
Now, what's really important, and we're going to talk about it, and I'll show you a small short video. What's really important is this space. Y'all see this space? It looks like a parking lot, right? This was where the actual Daily Record newspaper was in this space. So what happens, and I'm going to paraphrase, and you're going to hear it again, maybe one more time after that. The Daily Record was here, and Manly actually ran the Daily Record. I'm paraphrasing right now, you're going to watch a small video. So what happens is there's a young lady in Georgia that writes a column. She gives a speech and she says, hey, black men have been raping white women. They're good for stealing. So if you need to lynch a black person today, lynch on them. So, of course, Alexander Manly rebuttals in his editorial, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, some white women like black men. So now that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And now we have the 1898. resurrection. So this was actually where he was at, and it's said to believe that as they came here, what we call the red shirt, those were the guys that were actually a part of what we call the Tuskegee insurrection. They came here, they left Market Street because they wore a red shirt.
That is true.
Something about that color red.
Right. So they came from Market Street down 7th here. They had already tipped off Alexander Manley, so he was on his way out. So as he's leaving, the mob is coming this way. He's so fair-skinned that he passes, and they stop him. Do you know Alexander Manley? And he was like, no.
No.
And they was like, you see him, shoot him. They give him a pistol, and he keeps going. He gets out of the way. That happens. So I'm
Wow.
Itself over slavery. There was one city in the country where blacks and whites lived amicably, Wilmington, North Carolina. However, that would be short-lived as white supremacists refused to accept that same reality could be replicated elsewhere. With hate-fueled fury, they would stage the only successful coup in the history of our nation and leave future black generations fighting for what they feel they are owed. In tonight's Prime Focus, our Steve Elsensani traveled to Wilmington to shine a light on this dark period in our nation.
Oh, I will trust in the Lord. I will trust.
Perhaps 1 million footsteps have marked these sidewalks in downtown Wilmington since 1898. But only in the last several years have people in this beautiful North Carolina town really gotten to learn about the racist mob that escaped the history books after murdering black Americans on these same streets. People who walk by this church every day are now hearing that this is where black people ran for their lives and prayed for mercy more than 125 years ago.
I am the great-great-granddaughter of Ison Quick. I was really bitter. I was really angry. I used to cry all the time, like angry, fiery, angry tears, because this is generational wealth that was taken away from our family.
Inez Campbell-Eason, who was born and raised here, says she discovered it all by accident. She was visiting a museum that had hired a black curator who pulled out old records about her great-great-grandfather, Mr. Ison Quick.
He was a wood and coal dealer. He had a horse and carriage service. And in 1887, he was on the board of directors for the first black-owned bank here was the Perpetual Savings and Loan.
Never heard of the coup? Didn't know that your grandfather owned a bank?
Right. The more and more I read about and researched, the angrier I became.
Mr. Quick was a freed slave who ended up owning not one, but 3 banks in Wilmington. And records show he had at least $2 million in holdings in yesterday's money. At the time, Wilmington was a special place, where it wasn't unusual for white and black businessmen to work together. Mr. Quick ran the banks with 2 white men, and one of them was this man, a son of wealth, Dr. John D. Bellamy.
It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. It was basically the black Mecca of the South prior to Tulsa. The thing was, I think the fear was they were demonstrating that blacks and whites could live harmoniously after slavery. And there was a undercurrent of those who just did not want that to happen.
That undercurrent came from a backlash from all across the country to laws like the 14th Amendment that made former slaves American citizens. And what was happening in Wilmington was a bridge too far for white supremacists at the time. Lee Ray Umfleet is a state historian. She says that people who were still fighting the Civil War decided to set their sights on the upcoming election.
During the white supremacy campaign leading up to the election, the newspapers used every tool that they had. And there was a speech that was given the year before in 1897 by this woman, Rebecca Latimer Felton of Georgia. And essentially the article said, all black men have one thing that they want to do in life, and that's to rape white women. And so we need to do everything we can to protect white womanhood. And if that means lynching a black man a day, then she says lynch. So that speech was run as an article in the Wilmington papers in August of 1898.
Over at one of the black newspapers in Wilmington, editor Alex Manley wrote an editorial in response that did not go over well.
he essentially said that white women choose to be with black men. And that was...
That white women were attracted to black men. And that's part of this that's not being said, he was arguing.
Yes, and that was an insult to the white leadership, that a white woman would choose to be with a black man. So he becomes a target. And they take parts of the article out of context and publish it in the papers as an example of what these black burly beasts want to do to our white women.
And that's why they targeted the black newspaper. And they wanted it destroyed.
Correct.
It was this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, who led the men with torches to the black newspaper and burned it to the ground just days after the white supremacists swept the election in November of 1898. They stormed City Hall, throwing out the racially diverse city leaders who still had another year in office. And they used this rapid-fire gun at the time to execute black people in the streets. By some estimates, as many as 300 died. Those who survived hid for nearly a week in this racially segregated cemetery. A sign to this day explains in black and white how this is a place to bury colored residents.
Waddell was a former Confederate officer. He led the crowd to...
Okay, I don't know if y'all can see that particular, tree. So this is the picture that was taken as they burned down the David Record. You look to the left, you see that the church is still there, right? Look to the right of that, this is the house. This is the same house. So during that time, as we fast forward, not even during that time, we fast forward, y'all see the garden that's right there? That is not the church's garden. That actual garden is from the descendants. So the descendants of the Manley, Alexander Manley, his two great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, actually come here and help plant that garden. So what they have is the descendants that were victims and the descendants that were the perpetrators come and plant this garden. So they're still like Human Craze, those folks like that, they actually come and plant this garden. And that's for healing. So we can start having a conversation. So we fast forward, you gotta understand when they burned that down, we didn't have any communication as far as African Americans. What was going on in our community? People were scared to start another printing press. There was a printing press in Wilmington that was owned by a black family, but they didn't open it back up to like 40-some years later. After 1897, 1898, they opened a printing press and it's called the Journal, or the Wilmington Journal, by Brother Thomas Jervis. That is the building right to the left, the building to the left right here. And that is the Wilmington Journal. The Wilmington Journal has gone through several bombings and fires. And right now it has been saved. And now it's time to refabricate that building. It's owned by the Gervais Thatchers, and the Thatch actually passed away during COVID. And so it's still owned by the family, and now we're trying to get it to turn into a cultural center and publishing. And here is the actual journal started the Wilmington American Festival. And this is the paper. That day in April 4th, 1968, assassination of Dr. King, the owner of the journal, Thomas Jervis, was in charge of getting Dr. King.
It just amazes me that the white folks live in here and I think.
Oh, they know they don't care, or just thumbing their nose up at it as
like I'm watching
look what we
down
yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah, they
Now, when I try to show you where the Daily Record was, it was a space, right? So I'm gonna get a picture of where another space is. Yes, well, sort of. This is Gregory Normal Institute. So this is one of the first places where they teach teachers to teach. And so these teachers go on. Imagine these teachers being taught rigor and how to teach rigorously. Is right here. This is where you see the first Head Start. This is where you see it's not accredited though. So what happens is this place gets destroyed, and they go. Those teachers from here leave here and go 2 blocks over and teach at Williston Senior High School. So this is the home of teaching great teachers at Gregory University. You probably heard us talk about, or the video talked about earlier, excuse me, about Mike's grocery store being bombed. And that was further up the street on 7th Street, on South 7th Street. This is after integration, 1968. Now in 70, those kids are going to white schools, and they're being told, you can't be the quarterback because you're black. You can't, because we were kind of late on integration. If you were late, you can't be in the band, you can't play the drums because you're black. And one of those guys that was told he couldn't play the drums was a young man named Willie Vereen, part of the Wilmington team. And Brother Vereen passed away this year. And so they send them to a space that's not really popular, which is Gregory Congregational Church, which is an interdenominational church at that time, and it was integrated. And so you have the Wilmington 10. And you have 8 young men from Wilmington who have been blamed for bombing Mike's grocery store. You have one white supporter who says they didn't, a young lady, and you have another young man from Oxford, North Carolina, who they send for to help them out. His name is Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And so Ben Chavis and the white supporter and the rest of the 8 young men become the Wilmington 10 and the first political prisoners of the United States. With them, they get 220 consecutive years. They're given 220 years. Imagine being the youngest, who was Willie Vereen. You're 17 years old, 16 years old, and you get 200-some years. That is, you can't even imagine that. So we fast forward to 2012, and they are actually pardoned. I always like to talk about the 11th member of the Wilmington 10 that we don't talk about, and that's Brother Kojo Ntambu. Brother Kojo actually is a pastor here in Wilmington. He used to be head of the NAACP in Charlotte, but he stood at that stop sign as they were trying to get the Wilmington 10 into Gregory Congregational Church from ropes. They were called the Rights of White People. And that was called, they were sort of like, not like the KKK, but like them. And so they were shooting at the Wilmington 10, and Brother Kojo stood at that stop sign and had an actual shootout with them. And Brother Kojo was still living, and he was a part of that class in 1970, and he loved James Brown.
All right,
if you look at the church, you can still see some of those bullet holes that exist under the window. And this is Gregory Congregational Church. I do recommend, there's one member that is still here in Wilmington. There's only 2 left, and that's Brother Ben Chavis and Brother Wayne Moore. And Brother Wayne Moore has a book called The Triumph of the Warrior.
One of those he was speaking of, right in the white part of the
There's a book and a movie called Blood Unsigned By Name. If you ever get a chance, you should check that out.
It's called what?
Blood Unsigned By Name by Timothy Tyson.
I met him and I have his book.
Hey, you better get it.
Let me get that. Let me read it, bro. I'll have to go. It's on my shelf at the house.
And Tim Tyson, his father, was the pastor of Gregory Congregational Church. And they were from Oxford, North Carolina, and that's when they were like, oh, Ben Chavis, can you come? At that time, Ben Chavis was the youngest.
You see the sister?
Coordinator.
More?
NAACP.
Yeah, I'm asking.
Because we're related to Moors.
He just put up a post. He said, I won't be here Saturday. I'm going to New York.
Oh, shoot, man.
Trump's coming here.
I know that's
I saw his post the other day. I had a chance to clown and joke with him at the NAACP banquet last week. He was a great man.
Yeah.
He was 100% a triumphant warrior.
We said that Trump gonna be here today. We said, yep, we don't want to be anywhere where there's some cameras, but they'd be like, oh look, there's some black people for Trump.
Oh, I told him I want them to interview me.
I did leave this out. The young lady who was the white supporter of the Wilmington 10 and part of, they added her to the Wilmington 10. She passed away the day before Beverly was inside the party. So the day before she passed away, her daughter came.
Some of the biscuits. Your water?
No, I don't need any extra water.
Have you seen it?
I think I've seen it.
So we're back to Market Street.
So did we didn't pass Mike's yet, did we? Where the Mike's was?
No, we did.
Oh, okay.
To your right is the Bellamy Mansion, but we want to focus on the brick building that's behind the mansion. Of course, you might have heard about slave quarters in urban areas. That was the slave quarters. The kitchen is in the brick building behind the house because if it burnt down, it just burnt down. The house would burn down if the kitchen was in the house. So the slave quarters and the kitchen were behind the house, and that brick building back there, the green awnings. Also to your right is the Bellamy Mansion. Like I said, Henry Taylor was a part of, Robert Taylor's father was a part of actually creating this home. This was one of the only homes in Wilmington that had running water and plumbing, indoor plumbing. You didn't have to go outside during that time, so they were ahead of their game. Very smart. Now, we stop here not because it's the Bellamy Mansion, but we stop here because of one of the people that were a slave in the Bellamy Mansion. That's William B. Gould. Now, William B. Gould worked as a slave in the actual mansion. He was a plasterer. And you know, the kids from the Bellamy Mansion would run around and nick the wall, and they would call William B. Gould from the back, and he would plaster. But William B. Gould knew how to read. No one knew. So he would plaster the wall and get all the way down to the bottom, and he would sign his name. And it would give the Bellamys, oh, they would be like, who did this? Who did this? Who wrote on the wall? And there's actually still artifacts inside of the Bellamy Mansion where William B. Gould had signed on the wall. They took the piece out and put it up. Now, William B. Gould escapes from the Bellamy Mansion, goes all the way down, gets on a Union ship, and joins the Union Navy. He does that and keeps a diary of it, and you still can purchase his diary at the PX, in any naval situation, any naval base. He does that, has 6 children, 6 sons, and one of the sons of William B. Gould establishes the dentistry school at Howard University.
All this greatness coming out of North Carolina.
Yes, they do sometimes, but you know, this is a college town, so every now and again somebody drops some Dawn District Church in there. It'll bubble up or bubble out. To your right here, we talk about the red shirts, so we're going to talk even more about it. Anytime you see a cannon or a cannonball in front of an establishment like this, that means artillery is in this building. So what the red shirts did was they broke into this building and got all the artillery out. And another piece of artillery, as we talk about it, they said a rapid fire gun, the Gatling gun was here, and it came from Hickory, North Carolina. So they come here, they go and burn down. They burn down the data record, come back, re-up, get the Gatling gun, and we're going to take the actual tour where, not the tour, but we're going to take the actual trek that they did as well. And then right here to your right is a sign, and it is the only sign that says successful coup in the United States. A successful coup. They leave, they come back, go here, and imagine 200 people turn into 2,000 people. They go to City Hall and they say, we need you to sign over being the mayor. And they take over and then take the trek down 4th Street. So right now we're going to take the same trek as the mob.
For a long time, if you went to the library in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused, we were rejected by the librarian.
When I asked about or inquired about 1898, they wanted to know why.
I was told that yes, they had something, but they kept it under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here and what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War American South.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state. Take a look at the politicians on this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor black Americans and working class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The state Democratic Party handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it." Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a thing. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time. In one speech that Democrats printed in a Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch."
Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the Black-run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column. He made a simple observation that, at the time, was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manley wrote, "Every Negro lynched is called a big burly black brute, when in fact many were sufficiently attractive for white girls to fall in love with them."
Manley pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Manley's editorial became another tool for Democrats. Newspapers reprinted it, called it a horrid slander, and ran comments about it on a daily basis. It was just a few months before the election, and white voters were angry.
By the time the election rolls around on November 8th, black voters, Republican voters, had been thoroughly intimidated here.
By all accounts, the elections of 1898 were a sham. The Democratic Party had a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
"We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin."
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manley, "We demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manley was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire. This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manley's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and Board of Aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
Hopefully y'all can see that. I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah.
So we just took the trek that the Red Shirt took. 2,000 men come down 14. They get here to this corner. And when you burn the press down, all they see is smoke. They gathered at the what we call the water hole. They were hanging out, talking. talking about news, talking about politics, what just happened the day before. And they're like, it's not stupid, they don't know what's going on. Remember, there's no cell phones, we can't text anybody, no regular phones, they just out here hanging out. And they hear a commotion coming down 4th Street. They get to this corner, they ask them, the mob asks them, we need to disperse. So all the black men are like, we here every morning, what you talking about? Disperse for what? There's nothing going on. Say it again, you need to disperse. So heated words, they exchange heated words right here on this corner. Those 2,000 men part right here on 4th Street, and they roll the gap in the wind. This is where the first shots are. 4th and Carnegie, the very first people. As you can see, there's nothing here in this space. And we continue to fight for those placards and things like that. Equal justice folks that had put the plaque up for Black Wall Street, now planning to put us a plaque here saying lynching, but we asked that it does not say lynching. This was open. This was approved. We're asking that they don't put lynching there. They put 100% massacre.
I was gonna say, yeah, massacre.
You put massacre in Tulsa, you put massacre here.
That's right. This was a massacre.
Well, of course, you know they go by lynching.
Right.
So this is where that happened right here. We use that as a tool to impact this tour so we can start the healing. And then number two, like I said at the beginning, so we won't repeat what has happened.
Was this building back here part of it?
No.
Or next to it?
No, it was in here, in this part.
Okay. I just saw some sayings and stuff on that building, like Before I Die and some other stuff that I was wondering what it was.
This young man to the right, he's very important. He is the owner of Wilmington in Color. This is Cedric Harrison.
Oh, okay.
As we talk more about the tour, we want more folks to enjoy. As we talk about some great folks that come through, that have come through Wilmington, and the things that have happened. Everything is not all, I would say everything is not negative, and everything is not positive, but we must have those conversations. Talk about Wilmington and Color. Appreciate you joining our tour this week. Do you have any questions?
Do you get a lot of white people on these tours?
Yes, we do.
Good.
Let me do this particular film. It's on Prime, Amazon Prime. It's called Wilmington on Fire.
Okay.
Heard of it?
Wilmington on Fire.
Producers are a young man named Chris Everett who lives here in Wilmington. He's actually from Laurinburg, but he lives here in Wilmington. He actually married one of my closest friends from high school at church. My name is Charles Everett now. But he produced a film called Wilmington on Fire, and it tells the entire story. And there's a Wilmington on Fire 2 on the way.
Okay.
On the way, we talk about what happened after everyone left. And
You got right to do.
Come back with us. We want to thank y'all so much.
Thanks.
There's one more rule. Y'all take a picture when we get out.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking Wilmington